Have you ever wondered whether in a relationship that you are in, or maybe even a relationship in your past, was spiritually abusive? Well, in today's video, I'm going to be talking about some traits that you will see in spiritually abusive relationships, especially those that are romantic. Now, it doesn't always have to be romantic relationship. It could be a friendship that's spiritually abusive, but I probably will be focusing more on like marriages and dating relationships and just some red flags that you should watch out for and be aware of. And so, um, when you think about what abuse is, abuse is when there is, when there's like either a power differential where someone is using their power over the other person to harm them or or justify that harm or even like misusing something that is good to harm somebody else. And so when we think about relationships, like what do we want from a relationship, right? Think about that for a second. Like if you are in a romantic relationship, what do you like about that relationship? Assuming it's a good relationship that you want to stay in. What are some qualities about the relationship that you want to see? What are some things that you feel um, really help you as a person grow and be the best version of yourself? When you're in relationship with good people, you will find that you will kind of like automatically develop and gain strength in different areas of your life, right? Because another person is there for a reason. You're supposed to help each other up, build each other up, right? But in abusive situations, that does not happen. And so if in a spiritually abusive marriage or dating relationship, the person who is the abuser is using you and the relationship to fulfill their needs. And so something that you will see is it might not be, it probably is not going to be early on in the relationship. I can talk about what happens early in the relationship, and usually you'll see a lot of love bombing. If you don't know what love bombing is, look at my other videos. I talk about it a lot, but it's basically what it sounds, right? They come into the relationship and they give you a lot. You are showered with gifts, attention, affection, and praise. And I have a video about how you are groomed for spiritual abuse. And that also happens in spiritually abusive relationships, not just in like a big setting that I talked about in the video, but even individually. So you might find that at the beginning you just feel carried away, like, wow, this is just unreal. The person may do a lot of very showy things to woo you to that relationship, right? Whether it's gifts or just grand displays. And so what that does is it lowers your guard. And if you think about spiritually abusive or environments, the same thing happens. Think about the last spiritually abusive environment that you were in. How did they treat you when you walked in, right? They probably weren't mean to you. They probably gave you a lot of gifts and did a lot of things, not even physical, tangible gifts. It could be they were meeting a need and they did so in a grand way. And that is how people get, sucked into these things. Another thing that you also want to think about in a spiritually abusive romantic relationship, especially, is that the person who is the abuser has a very fragile ego, right? And so, what do I mean by a fragile ego? A fragile ego is when somebody falls apart. Oh gosh, I can't explain it very well right now because, like I said, I'm a psychologist and I don't want to go into the 101 of our ego. But the best way to put it is that they're very touchy, they're very easily insulted, they will fall apart at any sort of criticism. And so it's not something that you will easily see, but it's something that will rear its ugly head when there's an issue that needs to be taken care of. And this doesn't even happen only in friendship, I mean, in marriage or dating relationships. It can happen with friends. As I am continuing in this work and hearing people's experiences, people have had friends that spiritually abused them, and they used spirituality to control that other person. Now, where does this control need for control come from? It's what I talked about with that person's ego, right? They're very now all of us, I don't think anybody's like, yes, please, correct me every day, and I love seeing my faults. Nobody's like that. But with an abusive person will construct the relationship and construct the world in such a way where they are immune to that. So if you think about a dating relationship where the person is abusive, that person may be very angry or upset or hold a grudge for a long time when something is brought up. It could be like, oh, well, you did this and I didn't like that. In a healthy relationship, there are going to be some spats and quarrels, but you work through it. But when that person is spiritually abusive, they will shield themselves from that, and they will do so using scriptures. And so, an example is if you especially are in like come from an evangelical background, there's a lot of stuff around respecting your spouse. And when respect in certain circles is defined, it is basically 100% agreement. So everything then that is not in line with what the abuser wants is considered disrespectful. So let's say one partner says to the other, I don't want to go to this work party. I'm tired and I want to get some rest. That's construed as disrespectful because that person didn't want what the other person wanted them to do. So you see how that's an abusive definition because you shouldn't have to lose your agency in any relationship, right? A good relationship happens when two people who are relatively healthy, no one's perfect, but relatively healthy, are coming together. And so when you feel like your agency and your will is being manipulated, that's a huge red flag. And in spiritually abusive marriages and spiritually abusive relationships, it is done hiding behind scripture and spirituality, right? And so another thing that you will see in these types of spiritually abusive relationships, friendships, and marriages is that the person who is doing the abusing will have almost like an alternate sense of reality. That is the best way I can describe it because the world that they live in is not the real world. And so when people have been through these experiences, they'll tell me that, this person, like, I don't know what planet they're living on, but they think this stuff is happening. They think things should be this way, and it's not this way. And you're not crazy. They do. People who are spiritually abusive kind of like construct this reality around themselves that protects them from whatever they don't feel like facing. And so a lot of times, spirituality, um, in and of, and I think in its truest self, in its truest sense, is not good and it's not bad. It's supposed to be good, but it is misused often, right? And so someone can take what is meant to be something that is whole and healing from a spiritual perspective and use it to control others and to protect themselves from any accountability. And so you will see that in a spiritually abusive situation. People have talked to me before about how, like, different scriptures had been twisted to mean something that they didn't mean. That's another thing that you will see. People who are spiritually abusive really love pulling out whatever holy text or principles it is, but only when it's in their service, right? And so that's another trait that you will see is that twisting of scriptures. And then another thing too that you will see is that they have these they have these very what's the word I'm looking for? They have standards for people that they can't live up to. Nobody can live up to that standard. And I'm not talking about high standards. I'm talking about standards that rob you of your humanity. And so I have a video about how spiritual abuse denies your humanity. And so spiritually abusive people do the same thing. They have these standards in which they expect people to not have like human reactions to things. So, people have talked about talk with me about just the different situations that they've been in. And something that I've noticed throughout, whether it's an abusive marriage, an abusive parent and child dynamic, or friendship or romantic relationship, the abuser expects the person who is being abused to not act in a human way. What do I mean? They'll do things like insult the person, treat them horribly, but then expect them, the person who's being abused, to be unconditionally loyal to them, right? And so that is why you will see people who, when you are defending yourself against abuse or when you are gaining distance from the abuser, now you become the bad person and they become the victim. Remember, I've talked about DARVO. And you know what DARVO, it's like a five DARVO, five-step acronym. And I'll go into that more in a video because don't have a lot of time to do that right now. But think about DARVO, go look it up, and then you'll know what I'm talking about. But part of that is reversing the victim and the offender. And so when you are protecting yourself against that abuse, maybe you have an abusive family member, and so you don't see that person on the holidays. They will twist that narrative to be like, oh, they've abandoned the family. Or if there is a romantic partner that is engaging in spiritual abuse, and so you decide to, keep your distance from them, either end the relationship or gain emotional distance, then now the story is you are harming them. And the same in marriage. An example of this is and I hear this a lot in evangelical circles, and it's really concerning. But there will be a partner who is addicted to, I don't want to say the word because I don't want YouTube to flag this, but it rhymes with corn. Okay. So they are watching corn all the time and they have an addiction. The person, the other person in the relationship finds out. And so they're like, there's distance. And so let's say the person who finds out about their partner's corn addiction decides that they don't want to be like intimate with them anymore. The person who is now watching the corn blames that person and says, you're the reason why I keep doing this because you won't give me access to your body or your heart or whatever. Okay, so you see the dynamic there? And I hear this a lot, and I've even heard some evangelical pastors kind of insinuate that the other partner is responsible for managing that other person's addiction. And it's not just corn, it could be other things too, right? When you set limits as somebody who is on the receiving end of abusive behavior, it is going to look and be construed as you doing something bad. And so that's really important. Somebody who's not spiritually abusive completely owns their stuff. And so they're going to say, I did this, this is wrong, and these are the consequences, and they get it. But somebody who's not, they will do all they can to avoid that and put themselves in victim mode all the time. And then also expect you to not react in a way that is human, right? And so, people, some of you have talked to me about even ending friendships with people who were spiritually abusive and very controlling. And then the narrative is, oh, well, you were mean to this person, or you did this, or you abandoned them. So I just want you to be aware of those things. There, and the thing about it, that's just really unfortunate about spiritually abusive marriages and romantic relationships is that oftentimes those dyads, what I mean by a dyad is two people, right? So that couple, whether they're married or not, they're under a lot of times like another spiritually abusive system. So it might be a spiritually abusive church that is saying, hey, whatever the spiritually abusive spouse is doing is right and okay. And so it makes it even harder for the person who's on the receiving end to see that the things that are happening are wrong and get help for it. And so you will see those things. You will see scriptures being twisted. You will see just a lot of manipulation and a lot of control. But again, it's done under spirituality. And so, and also there are other kinds of abuse that could be happening as well. There could be financial abuse. And if you are whatever religion or spiritual practice you have, that practice and whatever is associated with it can always be used and twisted to serve your own agenda and subjugate somebody else. And so that's why sometimes the stuff is really hard to detect. I also want to mention that there's some really good books on that. Some people have told me, and my heart really just goes out to you about being in spiritually abusive relationships, especially marriage. And so there are a few books that are out there that are really good that talk about that. There's one by David Clarke called Enough is Enough. Then there's another one by David Hawkins. I don't remember the title of it, but if you just Google David Hawkins, psychologist, he has a lot of material on that as well. And then yeah, so those are some books that you can read that address things from the spiritual or Christian perspective. And what I mean by the Christian perspective is explaining how those things are used against you, like for means of spiritual abuse. And so I would like to hear from you all in the comments. What have you done in situations like that, whether it's a friendship or relationship? How did you know that it was spiritually abusive? And what did you do about it? How did you do the things that you needed to do to get free of that situation or confront it. And then also just resources too. One thing I really love about the comment section in this community is that people are really good about sharing resources and things that they have found helpful. So I'd encourage you to do that. And I will see you in the next video, and I hope you have a wonderful day that's filled with peace. Bye bye.